afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com and also over there at the other studio, and that is WFOV. And they're coming to you every day from that site at 92.1, and they're doing an excellent job over there. Mr. Paul Herring, I want to thank you for the job you're doing over there. And we're trying to do our part to solidify the partnership. And we hope you're doing our part as well as you're doing your part over there where you are. Want to welcome you back to another edition of the program here, allpointstv.com. Our program is called What's Going On, and we are now doing a live feed with Facebook. And I don't know if they know I'm back on there or not through this network, but I am back on there through this particular program, and so we'll see what happens there.
Plus, you can also, I do have a page set up too. It's where you don't post your postings, but we post the show. It's what's going on with George Moss on via Facebook. Yeah. So we got around them. There's no more ways than skin a cat. You know
what they're doing, John, is they're trying to limit the voices that are bringing another point of view. They want a singular point of view. And those of us who represent another standpoint, we're being silenced, but we're finding ways to get around it. And we're back here now doing this show on Facebook and starting last week. We're very glad to have you with us, and we'll be here for the next hour. We come together every Monday from 2 to 3, and you can pick the programs up on YouTube. And that's 24/7. You can pick us up anytime at your leisure. Let me do a couple of cleanup things before we get into some of the topics for the day. I wanted to do a couple of things that would clean up where we started last time, but didn't get enough time to finish. And I was talking about one of the persons asked about the 16th Amendment, the amendment that gave the federal government the constitutional authority, allegedly, to introduce an income tax, which was a federal income tax, which was not envisioned by the framers. They were prohibitive of that in Article 1, Section 9, Clauses 4, 5, and 6. The provision that was added to the Constitution, though, as an amendment, allegedly added because it was ratified by the necessary number of states. The process that we've used for the amendment of the Constitution in all of the cases where it's been amended up to this point, although there are 4 different processes that you can use to amend the Constitution, we've only used one, and that is by 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate, making a proposal, and once they concur on the language of the amendment, proposed amendment, then the matter is referred to the states, where it takes 3/4 of the states to, in fact, ratify the amendment proposed by Congress. Congress does not have the authority to ratify an amendment. It can only propose, and the states have the overriding authority to determine whether they're going to go along with the Congress, made up, by the way, of the states' representatives, both in the House, where you have the people's representatives, which was the way it was intended by the framers, and then the states, their representatives were supposed to be the senators. And so the way it was constituted was we would have the federal government having an overarching power, but the power being restricted on the vertical level as well as on the horizontal level being the 3 branches of government in the federal government, where you have the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch in Articles 1, 2, and 3. And that would give you a horizontal diversification of the power on the federal level. But they weren't satisfied with doing it just in that particular domain. They wanted to also do a vertical power restraint, and that's where they had powers on the federal level, and then they had powers also accruing to the states. And they did that not only in the original Constitution, but when they amended it 3 years after the ratification, they began to further put restraints in on the federal government so it would not go out of control. This was the intent of the 10th Amendment. And that amendment just simply says that those powers that are not expressly given to the federal government nor prohibited by the Constitution to the states are reserved to the states and to the people therein. And so this was a certain amount of restraint upon it. And of course, another way of restraining it was not to give the federal government unlimited purse strings, because if you have the power to tax, you have the power to destroy. And unlike the states, if the states began to tax, then you can always escape the taxation by going to another state that has a different tax base. And you can, in fact, go to a place where the taxation burden is not the same. But if it's an all-encompassing taxation on the federal level, then you can run, but you can't hide. They were I keep saying this over and over again, these visionaries just simply amaze me in terms of how they sat there for the almost 3-month period of time and worked out all the particulars in the Constitution and ironed it out to a large extent. It does not mean it didn't have some of the flaws, but they ironed out so many of the kinks there, they didn't leave a lot for the rest of us to do, which is why it has only been amended a total of 18 times. I know I said earlier it had 27 amendments, but don't forget the first 10 amendments were added to the Constitution at one point in 1791. So it's been amended 17 times after the so-called Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution in 1791. Okay, we're talking here, though, about the 16th Amendment, which was added to the Constitution in 1913, in February 1913. And one of the persons asked last week, apparently has some information about this, asked if the 16th Amendment had been ratified, and I had said that it was not ratified, and I wanted to bring the documents to the table today and read you some of the information about that so we can be on the same page as far as our information about the so-called addition ratified and added to the Constitution because of the amendment process. I'm going to read here from the document. This comes from the book by Bill Benson called The Law That Never Was, and it's written in volumes 1 and 2. He starts off saying the 16th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States was never ratified by a majority of the sovereign states. And he says by a majority, but what he really should say is by a 3/4 majority. Because don't forget now that you have to have the ratification process that we've used is that 2/3 of the Congress, which means there will be 2/3 of the House, there will be 290 of the 435 members today, and 2/3 of the Senate. Since there are 100 senators, that would mean then that you would have to have 6 or 7 senators, and what they would do in the Congress is they will propose. That should tell us something about the placement of the states at the center by the framers, because the Congress cannot ratify an amendment; they have to refer to states for its approval. 3/4 of the states, and since there were 48 states at that time, that meant then that you had to have 36 states to ratify, because 3/4 of the 48 would be 36. So only 12 states can abstain and still have the ratification. But if there's a 13th state, then the bill is not ratified because 13 states objected to it. 13 or more states objected to it. So with that in mind, I'll read this to you. This is from Bill Benson's book, The Law That Never Was, and it's written in 2 volumes, volumes 1 and 2. The 16th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States was never ratified by a majority of the sovereign states. This is the amendment that allegedly entitled the federal agent, that is, the government, in the federal territory of Washington, D.C., and their private collection company. That's the Internal Revenue Service. He calls it their private collection company. To collect quote, income tax, unquote, as falsely declared to be ratified in February 1913. After an exhaustive year, long search of legislative records in 48 sovereign states, Bill Benson wrote his fact findings in The Law That Never Was, volumes 1 and 2. He was able to unequivocally prove that the 16th Amendment was never constitutionally, properly, or legally ratified. The only record of the 16th Amendment having been confirmed was a proclamation made by the Secretary of State, Philander Knox, on February 25th, 1913. But listen to the words here that Knox used, wherein he simply declared it to be, quote, in effect, but never stating it was lawfully ratified. You have to understand something here. See, that's why we've been talking for a while now about paying attention to language. Because, you can change words around where it may appear that it's saying the same thing, but really it's something entirely different. For example, or for a different reason, where the language is in fact changed. You saw that, for example, when James Comey was reading his Philippic verdict against Hillary Clinton. We thought that given the 15 minutes of where he went on and showed one violation after another of the what really should have been an espionage operation, because that's what it was, giving out national security information on a private server, because you don't do it the way it was done with the Rosenbergs. You probably remember the book written by Louis Neisser called The Implosion Conspiracy, and which is a very brilliant book about the Rosenbergs, who had given atomic secrets, to the Russians. And Louis Neisser, who was an attorney, wrote a book about this, and I think he proved conclusively that both Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were in fact guilty of the charges that had been made. But it didn't come out so profoundly in the courtroom because they didn't want to give up the person that they had inside of a plant that they had. That is, they had planted a spy in a network, and they didn't want to reveal him, so some of the information was not revealed at the trial, but they had it on good evidence that both Julius and Ethel Rosenberg had gone into a treasonous relationship with the United States in terms of betraying their country and giving these secrets to Russia, out of the fact that they did not want to have this country to have the atomic bomb to exclusion of other countries, particularly other socialist countries, which they thought that this capitalist country posed a danger to it. So they betrayed their country, and that's what Hillary Clinton was doing, as quiet as it's been kept. This was an espionage operation. And James Comey read all the particulars for 15 minutes, and we were just watching that, knowing that this guy's getting ready to pull the envelope on this situation. But behind the scenes, they had this other person there, the one that's running it in the background, the one also is running the Mueller investigation from the background. And he had given Comey different wordings than what is in the language that says that if you, in fact, mishandle national security information, then that is actionable because it rises to the level of a felony because it is gross negligence. And the language that was given to Comey to use in terms of the exoneration of what this was with Hillary Clinton was grossly the wording in law is grossly negligent. What the language was that was used in its place, but it means the same thing, was extremely careless. So since it didn't have that particular language in the Comey statement, then Hillary Clinton was exonerated because they did not plan to bring a charge anyway. It wasn't Donald Trump for one. And so they use different language, but it really means the same thing, doesn't it? Well, in this case right here, they said that, you see, ratification is the language in the Constitution. And since it was not ratified, but they want you to hear ratification in the wording, they said in this case right here that wherein he simply declared, that means the Secretary of State, Philander Knox, simply declared that the 16th Amendment was in effect. Meaning that they have declared it to be so, and therefore, not using the word ratified, but it's in effect, that means we have to take their word for it. Here's some of the other comments made in Benson's work. According to the investigations of Bill Benson and others, the following defects were found in the ratification of the Income Tax Amendment by the 48 states. And he notes here 10 different violations that occurred. And I wrote out how many states did not meet the smell test in each of these 10 cases. Number one, not ratified by state legislatures and so reported. In other words, that would be 7 in that category. 7 states did not ratify the amendment and so reported the fact they had not done so. Number 2, the number of states that was not ratified by state legislatures, but reported it as ratified. 3 states. So far that we had 10. Missing or incomplete evidence of ratification, but reported as ratified. 9 states. Number 4, failure of governor or other official to sign, although required by state constitutions. 5 states. Now, I don't know why governors did not sign it, whether they objected to being pushed in this regard and didn't sign it for that reason, but 5 governors of states that reported that the states had ratified it, it was not signed as indicated by their own laws to sign that it had been ratified by the state, to certify that to the federal government. 5 states did not do so. Number 5, other violation of state constitutions and ratification process, 16 states. 6, other procedural irregularity making ratification doubtful, 6 states. Approval, but with change in wording, accepted as ratification of original version, 2 states. In other words, the language specifically proposed by the 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, that language was altered in some cases in the state level in order to get ratification because some of the states saw it and were horrified of it, and those states did not want to ratify it in the original form. So then the language was changed to accommodate those states, 2 of them, that ratified it with changed language. In number 8, approval but with change in spelling, accepted as ratification of original versions. There were no states in that category. In number 9, approval but with change in capitalization, accepted as ratification of original version. 2 states. And then finally, number 10, approval but with change in punctuation, accepted as ratification of the original version. There were no states in that category there. So when I say that this document was not ratified, it was not ratified because you could only have 13 states that had raised some objection or did not go through the procedure for the ratification. And those were multiple states that did not, in fact, qualify based upon the constitutional standard.
Now, what source did you just read from? Where'd you get that source?
This book is a book put out, 2-volume book, put out by Bill Benson, and the book is called The Law That Never Was, volumes 1 and 2.
Because I want to make sure people, you got different viewership, so they're going to be, some people might be real suspicious. So anyway, they can go check it up themselves.
They can go check it out, and that's not the only source, by the way. You can go and read. You can go and also you can go to the Supreme Court ruling. Go to the court case called, and I'll spell this: Brush-Haber versus Union Pacific Railroad, 240 U.S. 1 in the legal code. Brush-Haber is spelled B-R-U-S-H-A-B-E-R versus Union Pacific Railroad, where the court said, and this is a quote, about the 16th Amendment, or the proposed 16th Amendment, quote, created no new power of taxation, and that it did not change the constitutional limitations which would forbid any direct taxation of individuals. That's a court ruling. You see, the law, but that does not mean this. It does not mean that you do not send your taxes to Washington as so ordered, because the law is what L.C. Hastings said. L.C. Hastings is sitting in the House of Representatives now, and he was a person that was on the federal bench and was impeached and removed from the federal bench. And he decides to run as a member of the House of Representatives that had impeached him. And now he joined that body. He sits in there right now, and he said arrogantly, the law is what we say it is. And so although there was no ratification, because they said it was ratified, then that's the verdict. Not the constitutional verdict, but the verdict by the use of force in this country. Let me read something to you from a book I brought to the studio about this government and what you're dealing with here in this country. This is put out by Judge Napolitano, called "It is Dangerous to Be Right When the Government is Wrong," taken from Voltaire. This is a statement made by Voltaire, the philosopher. And Napolitano named his book after it. It is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong. Let me read page 363, some excerpts on page 363 of this book. Listen very carefully to Napolitano. He raised a question: do we have a two-party system in America today? He says, I think not. We have one big government party. It has a Republican wing and a Democratic wing. Neither wing is devoted to the Constitution, and members of both wings openly mock it. Mock it mean M-O-C-K. Make mockery of it. My fear, I'm still reading from Napolitano's book. My fear is based on the truism. Listen to this very carefully about these politicians. That in America, people go into government in order to utilize its power to tell others how to live their lives. Very few persons go into government in order to shrink and to restrain the government. Okay, we're coming up on a break for WFOV, and we'll take a break at this point with that particular audience. They'll be back in 4 minutes. Hope you'll come back. And we will try to stay around in the same area. There's some other areas I want to go into today, but I'll stay in this ballpark area here until you come back in 4 minutes. We'll see you on the other side of the break. Let me continue reading here from Napolitano's book. I said in the latter part of that is very few persons go into government in order to shrink and to restrain the government. It is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong, because government in America today is not logic or reason. Listen carefully. It is not fidelity to the Constitution, and it is not compliance with the rule of law. So you might ask the question, what is it then? Apollo says, rather, it is force. So it doesn't matter whether or not the amendment was ratified. They said it was ratified, and therefore, on the 15th or thereabout, that confiscation of wealth that was not intended by the framers is due in the nation's capital. Taxation, they call it. But taxation is theft. And the framers saw it that way. And that's why they tried to restrain government in its taxation policy, because they knew that if they were able to tax, you would have a government that's unrestrained and, in fact, bureaucratic and uncontrollable because of the size of it. So really, let's say that they've broken from underneath the Constitution intended by the framers. Okay, government today steals liberty and property in the name of safety. It restricts your ability to express yourself, to defend yourself, to be yourself, and it uses fear to keep the people submissive. Government rejects its moral and legal obligations, insulates itself from litigation, breaks its own laws, makes its own rules, declares worthless paper to be money, and then devalues even that. Government will not hesitate to use force upon those who challenge it. Government has made it unlawful to resist its use of force, even when those uses are patently and unconditionally wrong. And I can go on with this premise that it's dangerous to be right when the government is wrong. Doesn't mean that since the amendment was not ratified, that you don't send your dues. What you're really doing, by the way, with taxation, the federal tax, is that you're paying these people to leave you alone. And in fact, you cannot pay enough taxes to leave you alone, because they are, how they say there's nothing more certain than death in taxes, and you will pay taxes all your life, and you will never own anything in this country, such as land or the house that you in fact rent from them. You rent. See, everybody in this country is renting, and there are some that are renting from the renters. In other words, there's a renter that, okay, I said we would not be back. We would not be too far when you come back, and that's true. We're back now with WFOV is welcoming back, is being welcomed back from their 4-minute hiatus, and we're glad to have them back. And thank you for coming back again to the studio for the second half of the program. We're not really off this subject we were on here about the taxation. Does not mean, as I was saying earlier, that you don't send your money. They don't have. There's no money, by the way, in the present system, that you don't send the currency to the paymasters, because they are requiring it to be sent, and they are also requiring the time period in which it has to be received. Certainly, it has to be mailed by a certain post date, and that has to be done because the law says it has to be done. And if it's not, if you don't carry that out, then force will be used. That's what the Politorno is saying in this book. They will apply force. So the network is set up so that you will pay that or else, and you never cease paying property in this country because you never own the property. Everybody in this country right now is a renter. And you never cease renting. Now, there are landlords. You call the person that you pay the rent to, if you're renting from an apartment complex, you say, okay, you may use the word landlord. He's not the landlord. He is the agent acting in the name of the landlord. The landlord is the person that he pays the tax to, because he owns the building. So you pay him, and then out of that comes the tax that he's assessed. And I can tell you about how it works in some of the other countries I've been in, because I have to tell you something. The politicians are not different anywhere on the planet. You can go into other parts. I've been in 17 countries in Africa, and I've watched the taxation, how it plays out in other parts of the world, Africa and some parts of Europe. And I can tell you, based upon my own study, that the politicians are basically the same. Some are much more brazen in their use of force than others, and some have to be provoked before the use of force. Well, they all have to be provoked, but some are more open. I mean, Kim Jong-un executed some of the person in his state for their negotiation with Donald Trump. Last time that they had a meeting, and he was not satisfied with the way they carried out the interests of the state. And he was provoked and executed because he's the ultimate statist. But what makes them the same everywhere on the planet is that all of the person in government are statists.
They're parasites. If they didn't have
parasites.
If they didn't have that apparatus, they wouldn't have a job.
They wouldn't have a job.
And they wouldn't have power. And that's what they're. There's nothing good about any politician. They're just some are less belligerent than others. But that's about it.
You just now called the name out of this bartender. Ocasio-Cortez she doesn't know anything. And she was waiting on tables until she got elected. Now she knows everything. Knows about climate. Knows about the fact we're going to burn up in 12 years unless we get off this. Unless we stop these carbon emissions, we've got to stop traveling in airplanes. We've got to go back to the Stone Age.
Of course, none of them will do that. None of them will give up anything. Matter of fact, their families and their cronies they'll get carte blanche approval for whatever they do. They could fly around. They are not going to get. And Bernie Sanders is no different. He is a Kim Jong-un himself, man. He is I could just see him morphing into that. If you don't please Bernie, you can be executed because he is like that. I mean, I can just see that. All socialists are hate-filled and power-hungry. That's what they are.
John, they had a Representative Kennedy from Louisiana. He said that after they had the debate last week, he said all the persons that were on that stage are Fidel Castro without the beards. These persons, this is Fidel. These people are Fidel Castro wannabes. I mean, they're socialists. They'll call themselves, they'll say, Bernie Sanders would say that he is now these are his words, not mine, because there's no such thing as democratic socialism. Socialism is a state, just like communism is a state. The power is, in fact, invested to different degrees within the state. And the market doesn't have bargainers in it. The state dictates the market. So when they start saying that there's democratic socialism, that's just Bernie Sanders hiding his Castro behind the democratic socialist mask. That's a masking of this man. This man is not a bit more a Democrat than the man in the moon. He is a socialist, but really what he is a communist. But that word is still frightening in the vocabulary of the United States, so they don't use that word. They go close to it, but it means really the same thing. Power being wielded within the state. And that's where we're moving to in this country right now. We're moving closer and closer to that model of communism. And Donald Trump can say all he wants to, that we will never be a socialist government, but they're moving this country towards socialism every day, closer and closer. And when they raise their hand, it's really interesting. They asked a question last week. The question was, how many persons would give free health care to those persons that are here in this country illegally? And every one of the 10 persons on that stage raised their hand. And the New York Post had a very interesting takeoff of it and said that they asked a question on the front page of the New York Post. They asked the question, how many persons want to lose the election? And they had the same, they used that, raised their hand for that other question, but they were asking a question about how many want to lose the election because the American people are not there. But if the American people are not there and they're saying that they will in fact introduce that, the question is, in whose name are they speaking? They're not speaking in our name because Americans are not going along. We don't go along with what these politicians are talking about. Free this, free that. Who is telling, where is a poll taken that all this stuff they're saying free education, free this, free that, where is that coming from? Because what they're really talking about is not free. They're talking about their guns. They're talking about force. They're talking about the confiscation of wealth and then passing it out and redistributing it in their name so that they get the political benefit. So it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong. And they prove that to us every day in this country here. And you see it operating all over the globe the same way, but to different levels of the extremity of that position. But all the governments basically are about force. All governments are about force. And this idea that they are Democrats and Republicans in this country running the government, I don't know how you can twist your mouth and say that in Washington, that they are Democrats and that they are Republicans, when the voice of the people has been suspended. And our government has been taken over by the politicians completely in this country, just like they've been in control in other parts of the world. They're in control here as well. And I don't say that with any kind of relish, because we do have some constitutional mandates that need to be applied. But in terms of whether or not those restraints are in place in this country, the answer is that those restraints are not there anymore. They've broken from underneath the Constitution. And that's this book right here by Napolitano. I'm holding up this book here called The Constitution in Exile. And that book is one in which the same author, as it's dangerous to be right when the government is wrong, is saying here that the Constitution is now in this country in exile. And he's not the only one saying that. You go read Thomas Wood's book, Who Killed the Constitution? That's why we don't talk about the framers anymore in this country, because their verdict, what they put in place, no longer applies to the United States. We're moving closer and closer and closer to Karl Marx, and as we move further and further and further away from James Madison and some of the other framers of the Constitution, as we move further and further away from the framers, we're moving closer and closer to Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, some of the others, Gramsci. Don't forget the one who wrote Rules for Radicals, Saul Alinsky, and all of those persons. That's where this country is heading, and it's unfortunate that we have allowed this genie to get out of the bottle, but now this thing is on automatic pilot, and that's what Dan Bongini was saying this morning on one of the programs, the one on Fox and Friends. He was saying that, well, I don't even want to repeat his words, because his words were more alarming than mine. But we have to open our eyes up in this country if we want to have something that we're going to pass down to our children, because we're losing. We're losing America. Let me, I want to play a clip here. Maybe I should do that right now. Maybe I'll break my talk up a little bit with a clip I want to show that was something that came on the Mark Levine program 2 weeks ago, and I'm so busy that I didn't get a chance to watch it until a couple of days ago. But it aired on the 23rd on the program on Fox called Life, Liberty, and Levine. It's one of the great programs on television today. There are three great programs in my estimation on television. All of them are dealing with the rule of law. I think we have to start watching those programs a lot more. Napolitano had a program on there, and that program was very good. They got that off the air. They had to get that out of here. But there are three great programs on television right now. Mark Levine has a great program, comes on Sunday night at 10 o'clock on Fox, called Life, Liberty, and Levine. Judge Janine has a great program, comes on at 9 o'clock on Saturdays. That program is excellent. I think we need to pay very strict attention to that. And I think that Tucker Carlson, Tucker Carlson's a brilliant host. This man is a true scholar. I don't know what his academic background is, but this man is a scholar based upon the tremendous things he does with his information. Very clear about a lot of things, and very much grounded in the rule of law. So those three programs, I make sure that I tape those programs so I can watch them later on. I didn't get a chance to watch them when they're live because my time is so restrained. But I can recommend those three programs without any equivocation, because I can tell you those persons are pretty much on the rule of law, which we've got to get back to if we're going to save this country. But that does not mean that they don't make some evidentiary mistakes, but they have goodwill, is what I'm saying. Their intent is to, in fact, help this country get over this tremendous hurdle we've got to get over if we're going to be able to make this country work again, to make this country great again, which is what Donald Trump is trying to do. And this is why they try to stop him. Let me say one other thing before I show the tape, and that is this point. There are those that are saying that the people that oppose Donald Trump, they're saying that they hate Donald Trump more than they love the country. And that's not true either. That's not true. Their hatred of Donald Trump is because they hate the country. And I'll tell you a question they better not ask these persons running on the Democratic Party side. and that they will not ask. And that's why all those debates will be on MSNBC, NBC, ABC, CBS. Not a single one of those debates will be on Fox. The DNC made sure of that because they might get some different questions on that network. And Fox did a disservice to itself by going over there and doing those town hall meetings with these people. Wouldn't let them hold any of the debates. They totally shut out on Fox because they want these softball questions, which is what they're getting. One question that they're not going to ask is that they're not going to ask them to state anything, to state one thing they love about this country. That question, I can guarantee you, will not be asked. Ask those politicians on stage, what is one thing that you admire about the United States? And I don't care which one you ask. That would be a loaded question. And it would be very interesting to get an answer from any of them on that stage. I don't think, in fact, they would be stumbling more over that question than was Biden did, in stumbling over the issue raised by Kamala Harris, who was playing which we knew at some point one of the candidates would play the race card, and that's what she did. Played the race card, and talking about Biden was in fact playing up to the segregationists. Well, I guess so. All the segregationists in Congress were Democrats. Every segregationist that's ever been in Congress was a Democrat. And so if Biden was a Democrat, of course he is in fact coordinating efforts with the segregationists, because that was the life spring of the Democratic Party, the Solid South, up until 19, if you want to say 64, Johnson said they would have blacks voting for Democrats for the next 200 years once they passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Segregationist Party, they began to change civil rights to pass, signing the law, the president signed the law, the Civil Rights Act, and then black people got confused thinking that was the party of civil rights when it's the party of segregation. Okay, so I'm just simply making the point here that the race card was imminent. And now they tell me that her numbers went up by 6%, 6 percentage points. Kamala Harris would be very dangerous. And I hope people don't fall for this additional nonsense about race in this country. We need to stop playing this race card in this country. But let me go to something that ties into it.
You don't want to play the clip then? Or?
Yeah, I want to play the clip.
All right.
I want to play the clip, the 5-minute clip of the person by the name Michael McConnell that was on Levine's program 2 weeks ago. John, let's play that clip. And I don't think you'll be able to see it on Facebook, but we'll come back in 5 minutes and we'll talk about it.
Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin. We have a great guest, Professor Michael McConnell. How are you today?
Great.
One of the foremost constitutional scholars in the country. At least that's my opinion.
You're
Opinion of
very
many
kind.
others. Well, you are professor and director of the Constitutional Law Center at Stanford Law School, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. You've argued 15 cases in front of the Supreme Court. That's not shabby. You are widely regarded as a preeminent constitutional scholar on the free exercise and establishment clauses. You served as a federal appellate judge on the 10th Circuit from 2002 to 2009. You're published broadly. Your bona fides are really quite significant, which is why I wanted to have you here. And there's a number of topics that I want to touch on during the course of this hour. We're not going to get to everything I'd like to talk about. We'll get to some of them. The first one's impeachment. We hear impeachment being discussed left and right in this country, in the media, by politicians. Here's the impeachment clause in the Constitution. Here's what it says. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, I hear it said in the popular culture that pretty much means that it's a political decision, that if the House of Representatives has the votes, then that's pretty much good enough. Is that how it works?
I don't think so, Mark. So the phrase high crimes and misdemeanors was specifically chosen to be a very high bar. And the reason for that is that our framers wanted the president to be independent of Congress. One of the main functions of the president was to be a check, one of the checks and balances against Congress, which they thought, perhaps inaccurately, was going to be by far the most powerful and most dangerous branch of government. So they did not want Congress to be able to toss the president out on the basis of any low standard at all. And they deliberately chose the phrase high crimes and misdemeanors, which had a history in the common law, because it referred to misdeeds of a public nature of a very serious sort amounting to abuse of power. And I just wanted to mention, you read the impeachment clause to us, but you didn't mention the fact that when the Congress, when the senators are judging an impeachment, they are actually on oath, which tells us that this is not just a political vote, that they are engaged in a serious legal matter in which they are actually swearing to do justice at the time. And this was, and with the Chief Justice of the United States there to preside and make sure that the entire affair is being done as a court of law and not just as a matter of low politics.
So if it is pursued as a matter of low politics, would it be your point then that that's not what the Constitution provides for?
That's right.
That in fact, it's an illegitimate use of the impeachment power.
That's right. That isn't to say that it can be overturned, because the Senate is the sole judge of impeachments. There's no higher court to which it can be appealed, but the senators are on oath to comply with the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. And these words, as you point out, they have meaning. The common law, they debated it fairly extensively at the Constitutional Convention. And there were things they dismissed, right? I mean, in order to make sure the bar was relatively high, this word maladministration, it was proposed. And what did Madison say about that?
So George Mason proposed that the president be impeachable for maladministration. And Madison objected to that, saying that that would effectively make him serve at the pleasure of the Senate, meaning that they could get rid of him whenever they wanted to, and that would destroy his independence. It's pretty clear that Madison, at least, believed that the president needed to be insulated from impeachment for anything that isn't really a truly high crime or misdemeanor.
Yeah, that's, John, that was the clip I wanted to show, because I wanted to point out that what you listened to in this so-called expert on impeachment, there was 5 minutes of total confusion. You know, these people that you say scholars of the Constitution, these are highly trained parrots. Almost none of what was said here in that clip is true. The impeachment clause is not found in Article 2, Section 4. If it were found there, then how is it that you have the language saying that the president, the vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors? If that is the impeachment clause, then how are you able to bring about a impeachment without there being a process in place? You see, it's not the impeachment clause, it's the removal clause. It's the use of the impeachment process for the purpose of removing the president, the vice president, and other civil officers of the United States. And so when I listen to these scholars purporting to understand the impeachment process, I didn't bring the transcript, which I will go into a lot more next time, because I want to go into all the errors made in that statement that's made, because they're going to, given the performance last week, they're going to now have to impeach this president because they cannot let him stand given that performance last week. That's how bad it was. And so they're going forward with impeachment. And we'll talk about that next week, and I'll also clean up what this guy said here, this so-called scholar said here about impeachment, because everything he said was wrong. And we'll clean it up next week in the next of our programs. Okay, I got to get out of here. Want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.